Welcome to Navigating Consumer and Family Law Challenges. Insights from SoCal's trusted attorneys.
Welcome back to Navigating Consumer and Family Law Challenges with attorney Amanda Hill and Sarah Khosrabadi. Amanda is a Southern California family consumer protection attorney who helps clients protect their families and finances during life's most difficult transitions. I'm your host, Evan Mack, and today we're talking about the student loan debt and divorce, specifically whether you can force your ex to pay for your loans tied to school or professional degrees. This is, can you make your ex pay for their student loans? Miss Amanda, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
This is a very interesting topic. Like right off the back, can we wait? Can is this possible? Can we just start off? Is it possible? Can ex pay for your student loans?
Yes and no. I know that's a very lawyerly answer.
It was a lawyer. That's a lawyer response.
It is. I will say also that right off the top of my head, I go, oh, this, God forbid, if I were to get divorced, knock on wood, this would definitely apply to me because
Wow.
I went to law school and I have student loans. But California is very specific when it comes to this issue, and there's a lot of carve-outs to it. In general, though, the good news is for the non-borrowing spouse who decided not to go into a bunch of debt to go to school is it is in general separate property of the student.
So how does California treat student loan debt in divorce? Separate or community property?
Yeah, like I just said, it's going to be your separate property, except for if you're a cosigner. Let's say somebody decides to go back to school while they're married.
Yeah, that's what I did. Me and my wife got married. Me and my wife got married, and I went back to school, and she kind of was like a cosigner on my stuff.
So then it gets a little gray, right? It gets a little muddy, because then there's a divorce perspective on it, and then there's a consumer perspective on it, because the lender can go after both of you if you both are on the loans, right?
Wow.
That's just they could do whatever they want despite whatever a divorce judgment says. Even if you say, I'm taking them on, I'm the one that got the education, I'm the one that's going to reap the benefits. But you can put in a divorce decree or divorce judgment that this person is going to be the responsible one. But you also always have to put a disclaimer in there that says, well, yeah, but I know that the lender, if I default, can come after me or my other spouse. But I'm going to hold them harmless. So the way that you can protect the other spouse, the one that didn't get the education, is to say that the student spouse is going to be holding them harmless and say, I got the loans. I'm keeping it as my separate property. And if they ever come after both of us, I'm holding you harmless, and you'll be able to show a copy of this and say, no, go after them. So you would want that language in the divorce judgment to be able to show the lender if need be.
Can a spouse be reimbursed for helping pay off their ex's student loans, though?
Yes, except if the parties, let's say a husband and wife, they've been married for more than 10 years and they've been out of school for more than 10 years. So to give you an example, they went to medical school and now they're a doctor. The idea is they've been married for more than 10 years and the spouse that has the student loans has been able to reap the benefit of that because now they're a doctor and they're making good money and they're supporting the household with that money. Then there's an argument that could be said, well, the community benefited from those student loans, right? You benefited from being able to take out the educational loans, get the education, get the degrees, get the experience. And now, instead of only making, for example, $100,000 a year, you're now making $500,000 a year. And that benefited the community. So I will say that there's those laws in play, but based on my personal experience, most cases, people don't want to deal with that and don't want to say, oh, I still want you to help me pay for those student loans. Most people, who I should specify are reasonable, will say, I'll take them on. They're my student loans. At the end of the day, I still have, for example, another 30 years where I'm going to be a practicing doctor. I'll take them on, right? So, and obviously too, if one spouse is a doctor and let's say the other one is making significantly less, the court's going to look at what's just and what's reasonable as far as dividing the obligation at time of divorce. And if somebody has a much higher earning capacity, then they're going to have a better ability to pay off that debt anyways.
Off the top of your head, though, how many your clients or people that you've known and case wise are like amicable when it comes to this kind of stuff?
I would say a lot of them. I feel like
That's
this
great.
is not a very common issue that, or hill, I should say, that people die on, so to speak. A lot more times, in my experience, it's credit card debt, because what you'll see in is a common dynamic in marriages, right? Is one's a spender, one's a thrifter, or one doesn't spend as much and the other one does. So I would say consumer debt is usually more of a common fighting ground, so to speak, where they're like, I don't want to be strapped to that debt. I didn't decide to go buy that $60,000 new car,
Yep.
right? Or whatever the case may be. That is more of, I think, a debt that people fight over more often.
Do student loans ever affect child support or even spousal support?
Yes, not necessarily directly, though. I would say the way they impact it is when it comes to spousal support, all the factors come into play as far as each party's individual earning ability, but also what are their expenses? So their quote unquote net to income ratio, right? What is it? And so if they have a high student loan payment, let's say $800 to $1,000 a month, but the other side is asking for spousal support, the court has to consider that they have that legal obligation to pay that debt before, looking at, okay, can you then still pay the other spouse, spousal support? So that is going to be a consideration of the court.
So what if your ex stops paying their loan and tanks your credit score, so to speak? Do you have legal recourse? Is there something you can do about that, even though that kind of was out of your hands?
I mean, I think that's really only going to come into play if they're a cosigner in general, right? And they're actually strapped to the loan and they're on the promissory note. So they are legally obligated to it contractually with the lender. Then I think at that point, if you're already going through a divorce process, or maybe this is the triggering event that's leading to the divorce, then you want to file as soon as possible to protect yourself from any defaults or issues like that in the future. Now, the lender could still come after both of you, but then you can argue in the divorce process that they should be the one responsible for it, and you would have to argue to the court the reasons why they should be responsible for it. Like, they told me they were going to pay it, but then they didn't pay it for 6 months, and I didn't know until we got a letter in the mail, right? For example.
In your experience, do lenders typically go after both, or they usually focus on the primary person who took out the loan?
They're going to look at who is more likely to pay.
Okay.
So going back to that doctor example, right?
Yeah.
If the person on the loan is now a practicing doctor, and they can Google them and see, oh, they're a neurosurgeon, they're going to go after that neurosurgeon because they're going to assume that they have the ability to pay. And if the other spouse, for some reason, maybe they took a leave of absence because they're raising children and they're not actively working, they're probably not necessarily going to go after that spouse. All they care about at that point is collections and getting the debt paid. So they're not necessarily going to differentiate that, but they may strategically go after one versus the other because of that.
Are there ways to protect yourself though from their student debt during the divorce process? Anything like they should know?
I think a lot of people should have the relief that in general it is separate property, right? In most cases, it is going to be considered separate property. And so unless the other person is going to make an argument for, like I said, they are actually on the loan with them. Um, but keeping good records of the payments, making sure if there's any prior conversations, maybe going back and saving those, whether they're via text or email, about what they were going to do about the debt. Not necessarily going to hold up in court, but it might be a token or a reason for conversation and negotiations, right? One thing we haven't talked about yet that I think is of note, because it's becoming more of a common issue, is when two parents, let's say they have high schoolers and they're going to go to college, and they're going to go and take out, they're going to be co-signers for a
Right.
loan for their now college aged child. California law, if you're going through divorce or even if you're just separated, if you're taking that out and your child is over the age of 18 and they have graduated high school, you're choosing to do that out of the goodness of your heart. You're not obligated to do that. So that if you get divorced, right, you're not on the hook unless you both sign that.
Wow.
So because really under California law and it's interesting because other states like New York, it's different. It's up to 21 that you would have that obligation. You're not legally financially obligated to support that child. I mean, you may want to, and most parents do if they're financially able. But once they've graduated from high school, they've turned 18 or they've turned 19 because maybe they haven't graduated and they have to take another year. Whatever happens later, after that date, they're not required to do it, you know. And I bring that up because I've had to argue before, you know, some parents, they're going through divorce and then they already have kids in college and they're want to arguing over, well, you need to cover this child's car payment and I'm going to cover this child's car payment. And, you know, we're going to do something about the money that we were giving while happily married couple to these college age kids.
Right.
And the courts are like, nope, I'm not going to get involved with that.
Yeah.
Sorry. So it's a hard pill to swallow, but that issue does come up.
So even speaking what the courts do handle and how they do handle disputes about loans from, you know, family or for school related expenses? How do they take care of that?
So that's another hot topic because a lot of times the courts are going to go, okay, is there an actual written promissory note? If it's just, hey, you can borrow some money for a down payment on a house, that's a very common scenario, right? Down payment on a house. Or, hey, you guys fell on hard times, you know, here's a couple $1,000s. If it's not in writing with very specific terms of when the money is owed back to the family member and it's not signed and sealed, it's usually not worth anything because the argument is going to be, oh, that's your brother or that's your mother. You're never going to pay that back. I shouldn't be on the hook for this post-divorce, right? But if there's an actual signed promissory note, both parties sign it, the terms are very clear. Let's say there's a payment plan, there's triggering events. If there's non-payment, technically it's a valid contract that could be enforced in civil court.
Something did he have to have it notarized? Does that make it better, or does a regular or promissory note?
It makes it a little stronger, sure, right? Because then the other side can't argue that that's not my signature, that's a fraudulent signature.
All right. So can your divorce settlement limit exposure to future default risks?
Yes and no. Again, unfortunately, that truly is the case.
Yeah.
And so what we have to put in the divorce judgments is that lenders and creditors can come after both parties, right? If it's during the time that the parties were married. But if the divorce judgment says, well, this debt is going to be confirmed to that particular spouse, and this one's going to be confirmed to the other particular spouse, then the idea is if the lender does come after the spouse that's not supposed to be, you know, charged with that debt, then the other person's going to hold them harmless and say, don't worry, I'll take care of it. Or worst case scenario, they fall into some financial hardship or they just walk away from the debt and say, screw it, so to speak. Then the other spouse who's now being, you know, harassed or called because the debt's gone unpaid, they can go back to family court and say, hey, they agreed to pay this. They're not paying it. Now, you know, I need them to get them off my back. And you can actually seek sanctions or attorney's fees for having to go back to court to deal with that issue.
So what would be your advice to clients who are worried about being stuck with education debt that was not theirs?
I mean, again, going back to education debt, unless it was taken out jointly and both parties' names, in general, it's going to be separate property. So that's a big sigh of relief there. Again, there are some exceptions to it, but keep everything well documented, keep it in writing, any agreements that you have. Again, this is another reason why people should always get prenups, but so then it's really clear, doubly clear of what everybody's obligations are if they were to get divorced. But in general, you know, keeping a good record and making sure you are aware of what debts exist during your marriage and have financial clarity, even if they're not necessarily in your name, is always a good thing to do.
Awesome. Ms. Amanda Hill, thank you so much again for your time. I appreciate the information.
Thank you so much for having me.
And thank you all for joining us on Navigating Consumer and Family Law Challenges with Amanda Hill. For help navigating divorce and financial protection, visit knhlawgroup.com. Be sure to like, subscribe, leave a review if you found this episode helpful. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe button and leave us a review in the comments.